We're going to take a look at formulas now. Now, a formula is just an equation that relates several different letters together. If I were to ask you guys, do you know a formula? Almost everybody knows a few formulas like E equals mc squared, or probably one we've seen in the past, kind of like equals 2L plus 2W, right? This is the formula for the perimeter of a rectangle. Now, what will this tell us? Well, if we know the length and the width and we plug that in, that will tell us what the perimeter of that rectangle is. Now, a lot of times in our, say, science-y type classes, what we actually need to do is rearrange these formulas and solve for a different letter. See, this is solve for P because it tells us what P is equal to. Well, let's say we were in class and we knew what the perimeter of a rectangle was and we knew what the length of it was, but we wanted to know what the width was. Well, basically, we want to take this equation and solve for W. Now, the good news here is we already know how to do this, because if we were to classify this, this is an equation because it has an equal sign. It's linear because all the variables are raised to a first power. So our linear steps will still work for us. So remember how we do those. Step 1 is clear grouping symbols. We don't have any. Step 2, clear fractions or decimals. Again, we don't have any. Step 3 says move all your variables to one side. Now here's where it gets a little bit tricky because we got a bunch of different letters floating around. Our variable is W, so that's the only one we really care about. Notice we have 3 terms up here. Only one term has the W. So all the W's are on one side. They're on the right-hand side. Move everything else to the other side. So this term here doesn't have any W's, so it's got to go. So I'm going to subtract 2 L's from one side. Remember, whatever you do to one side, you got to do to the other. Now over here, these are not like terms, so I can't combine them, so that has to stay P minus 2L is equal to 2W. All right, so we got all of our variable on one side, everything that doesn't have that variable on the other side. Last step says divide both sides by whatever's in front of your variable. So we need to divide both sides by 2. So we get P minus 2L over 2 is equal to W. All right, the good news is that's a perfectly acceptable answer. The bad news is the back of the textbook may have something slightly different. Now be careful of a very common mistake here. You can't just cancel those 2's there and end up with P minus L is equal to W. And here's why. Doesn't this statement here say everything on the top needs to be divided by 2? Well, if you cancel those 2's out, that P was never divided by 2. However, you can rewrite it like this. Since this says everything on the top needs to be divided by 2, I can do P divided by 2 minus 2L divided by 2. Now, the P over 2 can't reduce at all, but 2L divided by 2 is just L. So there's another way to express our answer. So this is good news and bad news because you have some flexibility on how you represent your answer. The bad news is the book may have something slightly different. So if you have everything over one number, the book may break it into smaller fractions. So keep that in mind. All right, let's just try a couple more of these because really it's just using our linear steps again. All right, I'm going to make up just some weird equation. How about A is equal to... All right, not a real, it's a real formula, but it doesn't represent anything in real life as far as I know. So let's say we were given this and you were told to solve for C. All right, now we got something kind of interesting here, and you got to be a little bit careful about. Because looking at this, that's the letter A, and that's also the letter A. But one's a capital and one's a lowercase. In math class, a capital letter and the lowercase letter, the same letter, are actually different variables. Now I agree they're the same letter, they're both A's, but they're different variables. So for those of you that like to standardize your writing, like all capital or all lowercase, you can't do it here. You have to distinguish between those two. All right, so since this is a linear equation, we're going to follow our steps. Step 1 says clear grouping symbols. I don't have any. Step 2 says clear fractions or decimals. I don't have any. Step 3, move all your variables to one side. Well, I'm solving for C. I have 4 terms up here. Every term that has a C is already on the right. Move everything else to the other side. Now, in this case, I have 2 terms that do not have a C, so I need to move both of them. I'm going to move them one at a time. If you're comfortable, you can move them both at the same time. So I'm going to subtract 2 little a's from both sides. Is equal to negative 3b plus 4c. Then I'm going to add 3b to both sides. All right, 3b. 2 little a plus 3b is equal to 4c. All right, last step, divide both sides by whatever's in front of your variable. I have a 4 in front of that c, so I need to divide both sides by 4. So I get a minus 2 little a plus 3b all over 4 is equal to c. Now that's a perfectly acceptable answer. If you left it like that, you get full credit, of course. Now you could also, depending on the author put this, you might break this up into 3 fractions, right? The a divided by 4, negative 2a divided by 4, and the 3b divided by 4, and simplify anything you can. All right, let's do one more. Let's see, let's do a real world formula. Let's do, bring it backwards. Let's do, all right, so this is a real world formula. This is the conversion from Fahrenheit temperature to the Celsius temperature, right? So in this one, you plug in the Fahrenheit and it tell you what the Celsius. But what if we wanted to know this the other way around? I told you to solve for a big F. So let's do another one. Let's go ahead and pause here and see if you can do this. A little bit more complicated than the last two. Follow your steps. Go, hit pause. All right, if you're back, let's see how you did here. So this is a linear equation, so following my steps. First step says clear grouping symbols. So I need to distribute this 5/9. So we get C is equal to 5/9 F minus, and remember, we multiply fractions straight across. So that's 32 over 1. So when we multiply straight across, we get 160 over 9. All right, step 2 says clear fractions or decimals. I do have fractions, and my least common denominator is a 9, so you multiply every term by 9. Okay, so we get 9C is equal to here. 9 goes into 9 once, 1 times 5 is 5, big F, minus 9 goes into 9 once, times 160 is 160. All right, now that we don't have any fractions, we're going to keep on our steps. We're going to get all of our variables to one side. All the F's are on one side. Get everything else to the other side. So this negative 160 doesn't have any F's, so I got to move it. So I'm going to add 160 to both sides. So I get 9C plus 160 is equal to 5F. Last step, divide both sides by whatever's in front of my variable. There's a 5 in front of that F, so I divide both sides by 5. Get 9C plus 160 over 5 is equal to F. Now again, that's a perfectly respectable answer. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. However, this isn't the formula that you're going to see in any of the textbooks. They kind of use the trick that we talked about over here. Let's go ahead and, since everything on the top needs to be divided by 5, I'm just going to move this up right here. Let's divide everything by 5 on the top. So that's going to be 9C over 5 plus 160 over 5 is equal to F, or 9/5 C plus 32 is equal to F. All right, that's the formula you generally see in most textbooks from going from Celsius to Fahrenheit, right? You plug in the Celsius temperature, do some arithmetic, and it tells you the corresponding Fahrenheit temperature. Now, solving these formulas for different letters isn't really any more difficult than solving a regular linear equation. It's just because there's extra letters floating around, you get confused. Remember, that's what the steps are there for. Follow the steps every single time, read them as you go along, and you're going to find that this isn't as hard as it looks.